Welcome to Newcastle Family History Society podcasts. The Newcastle Family History Society, located on Awabakal land in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, provides support for those interested in family history. In the 19th century, Newcastle evolved from a remote convict outpost into a thriving coal powerhouse, a true Coalopolis. From convict labour and colonial policy to industrial ambition and the global gold rush, this podcast uncovers the layers of history that forged Newcastle's identity. Join Society member Julie Keating as she digs into the mines, sails through unsafe harbours and walks the streets laid out by early planners, revealing the people, places and power struggles that shaped Newcastle.
This podcast is based on my book Newcastle in the 1800s, From Penal Settlement to Coalopolis. Towards the end of the 19th century, it was fashionable to create words using a defining characteristic with the ending -opolis. Due to the quantity of coal mined and exported from Newcastle, the settlement became known as a coalopolis. There are several reasons why this term is appropriate for Newcastle. The borehole seam, which consisted of good quality coal, lay under much of Newcastle. Geographically, the town was ideally situated to export the coal, as it had both river and ocean frontages. Government decisions influenced Newcastle's rise as a coal mining port. Initially, convicts were used to mine coal. Neither the convicts or their supervisors had experience in the industry, and the unreliability of production meant the coal could not be sold on the world market. The government gave a monopoly arrangement to the Australian Agricultural Company, or the AA Company, as it is commonly called. Another factor which contributed to the Coalopolis status was the increasing demand for coal due to the Industrial Revolution and the gold rushes of the 1850s. Newcastle was in the right place at the right time to satisfy export demand for high-quality coal. The first European to officially land at Newcastle was Lieutenant John Shortland. In September 1797, his craft was sent north from Sydney to search for escaped convicts. Shortland sailed as far as Port Stephens and decided to turn around for the return trip as no trace could be found of the escapees. He needed to seek shelter from a southerly gale and came across what Cook had described as a small clump of an island. We now know this as Nobby's Island. He entered the harbour and landed in the vicinity of the southern headland. Whilst exploring the area, Shortland came across pieces of coal, presumed to have fallen from the cliffs. He thought this might provide a source of revenue and took some samples back to Sydney. He also noted the vast amount of timber, particularly cedar, which grew along the riverbanks. Realising that coal was a valuable resource, Governor King had the area surveyed to assess its suitability for a penal settlement. The survey party compiled a favourable report on the timber and coal resources in the area and the transport options. News of the coal discovery spread and private traders came to the area. Coal was gouged from the cliffs and it is thought the first exported load was taken to Bengal, India in 1799 by the sailing vessel Hunter. In 1801, King proclaimed all coal and timber at Hunter River was the property of the Crown. This prevented private traders from coming to the area, but sometime later a change was made so that free traders could apply for a licence to mine coal. A small settlement named Kingstown at Hunter River was established to house reoffending convicts in 1801. The settlement was eventually abandoned due to poor management and another attempt was made in 1804. Governor King wanted to move the leaders of the rebellion at Castle Hill away from their followers. Most convicts were engaged in mining coal, cutting timber or producing salt. The first load of coal mined by convicts was taken to Port Jackson aboard two vessels, the Lady Nelson and the Resource, in April 1804. The coal was found close to the surface and tunnels were built at Collier's Point, later the site of Fort Scratchley. Convicts used picks, then carried the coal in bags or baskets to the loading area at the bottom of the High Street, now Watt Street, where it was placed into small government boats for the trip to Sydney. The Port of Newcastle did not have safe entry. As increasing numbers of boats entered the harbour, small vessels were succumbing to the dangerous conditions. Insurance companies were concerned about the number of shipwrecks occurring in Newcastle harbour and charged higher premiums, a problem for shipping firms. An article in the Newcastle Morning Herald and Miners Advocate of April 9, 1932, gives an account of one of the measures taken to improve harbour safety. In 1813, the government began the building of a breakwater or causeway between the mainland and the island of Nobbies, the object being to endeavour to deepen the channel of the river by narrowing the entrance and also to protect the harbour from the fearful southeast gales. In July 1818, Governor Macquarie visited the settlement. One of his principal acts was to lay the foundation stone of the breakwater in a most ceremonious manner. He blessed it with the name of Macquarie Pier and stated that the undertaking would be a national work and that when completed the pier would be 930 yards long, 32 feet wide and levelled off at the top to form a fine promenade. Convicts were forced to work on the breakwater in conditions less than ideal. Trying to force stones into position in high and dangerous seas meant there were injuries and deaths. The authorities were not concerned about such incidents, and no official statistics were compiled of injured prisoners. Once completed, the pier did improve the harbour entrance. It provided additional shelter for ships and reduced the swell at the wharves. However, many ships were still unable to use the port because of its shallow depth. The pounding surf led to the deterioration of the pier because of the unsuitability of the materials used, and most of it had to be replaced. In the early 1820s, the government was forced to move prisoners to Port Macquarie due to the large number of convicts escaping back to Sydney. Once this occurred, there was nothing to drive growth in the settlement. The government was coming under increasing pressure to improve safety conditions. Convicts were sustaining serious injuries, often because both those in command and those digging coal did not understand safe practices. Thus mining was a haphazard affair. Commissioner John Bigg was appointed by the English government to undertake a review of conditions in New South Wales under Governor Macquarie. He noted that Newcastle was largely regarded as a place which provided coal and timber for Sydney. In relation to coal mining, Bigg recommended that licences be granted to individuals for a number of years. Under the system, the government would retain its right to ownership of the coal and would have whatever quantity it required. Some attempt was made to implement the system, but there was not a perceived increase in efficiency. The government was coming under pressure to increase production, especially as there was a coal shortage in Sydney. Henry Dangar was sent to make a detailed survey of the area. He designed the city and located the town between Pacific and Brown Streets. The street layout, arrangement of allotments and location of reserves was decided by Dangar. His plan included 9 streets and an area designated for a marketplace. There were 7 roughly formed streets that existed in the early settlement. These original street names were changed, and some of the new names recognised the important event of the time, the development of steam power. The streets running down the slope of the hill towards the harbour were named for the scientists and inventors involved with its discovery: James Watt, Matthew Bolton, Thomas Newcomen, James Wolfe and Thomas Perkin. The streets running parallel to the harbour recognised local influences: King Street after Governor King, Hunter Street after Governor Hunter, Church Street where Christ Church was located, Tyrrell Street after William Tyrrell, the first Bishop of Newcastle, and Pacific Street after the Pacific Ocean. The Australian Agricultural Company was formed in 1824 when a meeting was held in London to obtain 1 million acres of land in the New South Wales colony. The aim was to raise merino sheep and grow crops such as wheat, grapes, olives and flax. A site was selected between Port Stephens and the Manning River and across to Stroud. The government was searching for a company to take over the coal mines and run them on a more efficient and profitable basis. There were few companies in the area, and an arrangement was made with the AA Company to lease the government coal mines for 31 years. Mining commenced in 1831 near Church Street and Menkins Lane, and the coal was carried to the harbour along its own railway. A wharf was built at the end of Brown Street to load the coal from A pit. It was loaded into skips, and using gravity, the full skips ran down the line at the same time, pulling empty skips to the top. As the wagons travel both ways on steel rails, this is regarded in some quarters as being the first railway built in Australia. Today there is a plaque in Church Street which records the historical significance of this mine opening. It states, "The A pit of AA Company was opened a little below this point in 1831 and functioned for about 20 years with free and convict labour. The colliery was the first in Australia to be privately owned. Its railway carrying coal to the harbour was also Australia's first." The company expanded its operations in 1835 with the opening of its second pit, B pit. This was located near the intersection of Nesca and Kitchener Parades and was followed by C pit near Bingle Street, Anzac Parade and High Street. Entry from Sydney to the convict settlement could be gained by sailing between Nobbies and the southern headland or by going north around Nobbies. The existence of a rocky ledge made the option of going between Nobbies and the southern headland difficult, and Governor Macquarie's solution was to have convicts construct the Macquarie Pier to block off this access. Sailing north around Nobbies was also difficult due to the island's position and height. The tallest sailing ships of the time rarely had masts taller than 100 feet, and the more common height was 60 feet. Nobbies, at a height of 203 feet, was a wind barrier in certain conditions. Some ships would be becalmed, and it was common for ships to lie at anchor, waiting for favourable wind and tide to take them into the harbour. Cutting down Nobbies and using the fill to extend the breakwater seemed a logical solution to the problem. A government committee recommended to Governor Darling that the breakwater be extended, and 4 years later Captain George Barney was appointed to supervise the work. However, it was found the material taken from Nobbies was too soft to withstand the pounding surf, and work ceased on the project. The coal trade was becoming quite lucrative for the AA Company, and other individuals and companies began to advocate for change. They wanted to have some of the booming trade, buoyed by the world price for coal. The first recorded breach of the company's monopoly occurred in 1841. Coal was mined at the Ebenezer pit on the southwestern side of Coal Point. This was on the property of Reverend Threlhill, who had been granted 1,280 acres, taking in present-day Toronto and Coal Point. The coal was sold in Sydney, but no legal action was taken at that time. More substantial breaches occurred in the following years. In 1845, the company took legal action against the Brown family, who owned a mine at 4 Mile Creek at Maitland. The Browns had negotiated with the Hunter River Steam Navigation Company to supply coal. A Supreme Court ruling the following year confirmed the legality of the company's monopoly. Public opinion and the inability of the AA Company to enforce its monopoly rights led to a proclamation in the Government Gazette of April 1847 that ended the agreement. In 1843, Thomas Grove purchased an area of land bounded by Turton Road and High, Bridge and Platt Streets. Grove lived an isolated life until timber cutters came to the area to construct the Great Northern Railway. Grove acquired more land in the 1850s, this time in the Bray Park area and behind the Calvary Mater Hospital. Shafts were sunk in the hilly area and a seam of good quality coal was struck. This was part of the borehole seam, which lay under much of Newcastle. Grove realised the potential of the site and formed the Waratah Coal Company. As production was declining from the shafts in the inner city, the AA Company looked further afield for another mine site. In 1848, the company sunk a shaft on its West Newcastle estate, where it found coal of good quality and considerable thickness. The mine became known as D Pit, later the Borehole Colliery, and was located between Denison Street opposite St Peter's Anglican Church and Vida Street, Hamilton. Miners' cottages ran down Cameron's Hill towards the Steele Street intersection. Further expansion occurred in 1851 when E Pit was opened. This mine was located between Everton and Jamarick Streets. The coal was transported by rail from each pit to a main line, which ran along King Street through Civic Park, across Derby Street to Crown Street, where it used the bridge to cross Hunter Street to get to the waterfront. The discovery of gold in California impacted the fortunes of the coal industry in Newcastle. Before, foreign trade in coal was practically non-existent, but now there was huge demand from America. Newcastle was the closest established coal port that could supply the required coal. By October 1850, 16 of the 22 ships waiting to load coal were from North America. However, exports from Newcastle were limited due to issues with the port. Many ships could not berth in the harbour due to its shallow depth, and there was a lack of berthing and loading facilities. The demand for coal outstripped supply as ships came from California to Newcastle, and American whaling vessels were ordered to dispose of their oil at Sydney and load coal at Newcastle. British and foreign vessels also wanted to take advantage of the high freights being paid for the profitable coal cargo. The discovery of gold in Australia in February 1851 meant some ships were left without crew members, as sailors left to try their luck on the goldfields. The Deputy Governor of the AA Company, Mr Blaine, suggested that wages and conditions must be improved so that employees didn't leave for the goldfields. This was not acted upon, and the company was forced to find workers overseas. In April 1852, 80 Chinese came to work for the company in Newcastle.
Thanks, Julie, for taking us on this journey into Newcastle's remarkable 19th century past and highlighting the factors that transformed Newcastle from a penal settlement into a global coal exporting hub. Join Julie next month, where she'll continue the story as monopolies, industrial ambition and engineering ingenuity reshape the city's future. You've been listening to Newcastle Family History Society podcast.